At what point is the private sector willing to pay to do what needs to be done in the region?
We have a diet of limitations, but not a sufficient discourse on our possibilities.
This is a critical step in our regional integration process.
Mistrust within countries is defeating us. It's not an economic matter, that is a matter for mindset.
West Indian people, we are a gem.
Let's advance our partnership together through the region.
Let us organize and do that together.
We need to ensure that there's transparency in what we do.
I do it because I love it. I'm passionate about watching things grow.
If there's a will, you will find a way to make it happen.
What I would certainly like to do is to begin today's session by handing over to our moderator for this morning, Sir Ronald Saunders, who is a visiting fellow from the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London, and I believe then he would be able to introduce the panelists for today. Saunders.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like, in order to shorten the sessions, this particular session, I'd like the usual protocols that we will all begin with to be regarded as having been observed. And secondly, I am not going to go through the long biographical details of these distinguished gentlemen who've joined me on this platform this morning, because I'm sure you are all well aware of just how distinguished they are. And just in case you need reminding, their profiles, of course, are in the brochure, so that you could look to that. But let me welcome you to today's first session, which is concerned with the status of private sector advocacy. It brings together a panel of distinguished representatives of the private sector from the region. The task of the panel is to examine the reasons for the demise of institutions that represent the private sector and to consider a framework for joint action. I've been asked to make a few comments to put this panel discussion into some context. I don't believe anyone in this room needs reminding that the Caribbean is facing its most challenging economic times in recent years. Indeed, the parlous state of some economies border on collapse. Burdened as they are with high debt, alarming budget deficits, and disquieting balance of trade deficits. Some governments are unable to provide the goods and services that their communities require, including wages for public servants, and they have borrowed their way into calamity. Some are already in the clutch of the International Monetary Fund as a lender of last resort, complete with its iron-hard conditionalities that have impacted severely on domestic creditors, that have been required to endure greater sacrifices than foreign creditors. Yet it is this same private sector who are also being asked to maintain employment, keep prices down, and to maintain and expand exports that could lead to increased economic growth. Other countries are not far from the IMF's embrace. Throughout the region, we are witnessing a breakdown in the institutions that are vital to the region's well-being and progress. The consequence is higher unemployment, increasing crime, crumbling infrastructure, including roads, ports, and importantly, tourism plants, education, including the University of the West Indies, and restricted access to capital markets, and even then, at higher rates of interest. Altogether, this is a troubling scenario that makes the region and the countries within them less competitive in the global marketplace. At the same time, in a region where some of its member states produce enough food to feed the entire area several times over, there is food insecurity and a food bill that is unsustainable. In a region where there is no energy security beyond dependence on the generosity of an external government, there is no regional plan to pool regional resources in joint action to develop access to energy that would include oil and gas and also renewable sources of energy. This is the scenario in which we are discussing export-led growth. But for the most part, it is the private sector that exports or achieves export earnings from services. Yet the private sector appears to be significantly absent from the table of national policy making and implementation. In Canada, the United States, the European Union, and now even in China and India, governments consult widely and deeply with their private sectors who are affected by trade rules and trade agreements that those governments enter into. The negotiators for these governments negotiate for their national private sectors to expand and deepen their market penetration and to put them in the best competitive position. We have to ask the question, how many private sector organizations are involved with Caribbean governments in ongoing negotiations at the World Trade Organization in Geneva? In which individual countries of the Caribbean has the private sector said to governments that the fiscal situation is unsustainable and asked for a plan in which they could play a meaningful role? And at the regional level, where is the Caribbean-wide private sector organization that commands the attention of governments by laying out its own plan for overall economic growth and development? Two private sector organizations presently stand out in this otherwise barren field. The first is the Caribbean Hotels Association in collaboration with the Caribbean Tourism Organization. And the second is the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association. Both organizations are vital to the region's foreign exchange earnings and to employment. But as their industries are under threat, and therefore their ability and that of their members to continue to deliver the foreign exchange and employment that is expected, how much of their advocacy has received attention and action by policymakers? Where today, for instance, are we in the case of the competition we are getting from the United States, Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico over subsidized rump? And in any thinking that might be occurring about export-led markets, what private sector plans have been made for China? China is now the world's second largest economy. It has over $3.3 trillion in foreign reserves. What is the Caribbean plan for penetrating the Chinese market with goods and services apart from the extractive industries that China wants? Certainly, China has penetrated our markets. In a few short years, since 2005, it now enjoys a huge balance of trade surplus with the region. Now, in the best of times, there should be in the region a standing structure of regular and meaningful dialogue and consultation between governments and the private sector. In the worst of times, such as the times in which we now live, the urgent necessity for such a standing structure is a vital necessity. Governments should recognize that vital necessity at both the national and regional levels, but so too should the private sector. And the creation of that structure of government-private sector consultation ought not to be a waiting game. The private sector is already at the sharp end of the region's fiscal and economic difficulties. Therefore, the private sector owes it to itself to present its own ideas to government and to advocate them publicly, seeking the involvement of the media and other non-governmental organizations in pushing its objectives. For in the words of the Guyanese poet Martin Carter, all are involved and all are consumed. I thank you very much. Those are my opening remarks. And I'd like now, if I may, to call upon Frank Ward, who is the chairman of the West Indies Rum and Spirit Producers Association. Frank.
This morning, I'm going to give you a very, very brief presentation on what the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association is all about, its membership, its aims, its goals, and what the organization has been doing since the early 1960s to bring to the attention of the regional governments matters which are of interest to the industry and which can affect the industry's viability and export performance. What is the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association? It was founded in the 1960s. The Secretariat is based in Barbados, and it represents the national rum associations from 13 ACP Caribbean countries. Individual rum companies are not members of WRSPA. The national associations in each country is the recognized member for WRSPA, and we have 13 members. Up until a few years ago, Bahamas was a member of the organization, but Bahamas no longer produces rum, so its membership lapsed. Minister, yes, I heard your presentation at the COTED meeting last week. Okay. What is the vision of WRSPA? It is to be viewed as quality producers representing international best practice in areas of production, environment, and social responsibility. We have gone beyond just being pure producers. We have recognized that we have a corporate responsibility to the citizens of the region, both in respect of how we do business and our impact on the social fabric and the environmental fabric of the region. We have developed what we consider to be a mark of quality and provenance, the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark, and it is designed that those rums which carry the mark will signal to the consumer that these are rums coming from a particular geographical space, the Caribbean, the birthplace of rum, and they are of a very, very high quality. And for the Authentic Caribbean Rum Mark to be an authoritative, self-sustaining, and enduring instrument for the benefit of the ACP Caribbean industry. Basically, we are attempting to do what Champagne has done, what Bordeaux, Rhône, and those Appellation Contrôlée vineyards in France does. What is the importance of the rum industry to the Caribbean? The statistics are going to vary, but a broad brush picture is that there are about 50,000 jobs in the region directly related to rum in the ACP Caribbean. Around 10,000 of those jobs are direct employees. The key issue here is that a lot of the distilleries are located in rural areas, which are more financially disadvantaged parts of the individual countries. Also, it has become increasingly an important employer of female labor. Since 2003, female labor as a component of the total workforce has improved by 20%. And overall, over the last few years, the skill levels have been improved by training initiatives. Now, the importance of rum to the performance of the economies of the Caribbean is directly related to the export performance of the industry. The consumption of rum locally is very small because our population size would not allow for the total consumption of what the industry can produce. Therefore, from the outset, the industry has always been export-oriented. About 70% in total is exported to other countries. In some particular countries, that increases to about 95%. So rum It's a very, very important economy generator of foreign exchange, employment for all of the countries, but it is heavily skewed in some countries more than in others. $500 million US dollars in foreign currency, and about $250 million US dollars in income in tax revenues. These are some of the rums which are produced by the rum companies in the ACP Caribbean. More than one company would have more than one brand. So in total, there are probably about 30 brands being represented by the 13 countries, maybe more. And these are just a snapshot of these brands. Now, coming to the organization itself, what is the role of WRSPA? WRSPA was set up in the 1960s to promote the development of ACP Caribbean rum as a premium category in the international drinks market. And it represents the interests of our member associations and, in turn, their member companies. One key activity of WRSPA from the outset has been to advise CARICOM, the Caribbean governments, right now it's CARIFORUM governments, on trade policy and how that will literally affect the export performance of rum. And we also seek to promote between our companies technical collaboration and environmental best practice. One key issue, common standards and definitions of rum, that directly relates to our trade advocacy attempts, because the definition of rum and standards for rum can act as barriers to trade, and they can also give companies who do not follow our definitions and standards an unfair competitive advantage. And in later years, we have paid a great deal of attention to the responsible advertising, marketing, and consumption of rum products. The trade advocacy itself. CARICOM and CARIFORUM member states negotiate trade agreements for the benefit of and on behalf of the private sector. That is the fact. From the industry's perspective, therefore, it is incumbent upon us to comprehensively brief our member states in a timely manner on issues which the industry considers could be detrimental to its ability to conduct business in its domestic and export markets. So what WRSPA basically does is make sure that it is fully aware of all events which may impact upon its ability currently or in the future, and which will have an adverse effect on its viability and export performance. The CARIFORUM rum industry, as I said, it's export driven. Our main markets and their traditional markets are Canada, the European Union, and the United States of America. However, individual companies, in a nod to a statement Sir Ronald Saunders made earlier on, they are looking at other markets. China is one, South American. So basically, non-traditional markets are being explored at this point in time by individual companies in response to what they see are deepening threats in their ability to effectively compete in their traditional markets. Therefore, the heavy dependence on exports has driven a strategy of monitoring government and commercial activity in its export markets. This early warning system has proved beneficial in bringing the concerns of the industry to the attention of CARIFORUM member states. It is, however, not enough to bring our concerns to the attention of the CARIFORUM member states. There is a great deal of work which has to be done to, in effect, convince the CARIFORUM member states that what we are bringing to their attention, what we're asking them to intercede on behalf of the industry, is actually a valid complaint, a valid reason for them to take action. So we have got to marshal our facts, we have got to present our facts accurately and concisely. In other words, we have to tailor our message to the recipient. The early warning system, it monitors a wide spectrum of activity, and hitherto it has been in our traditional markets of Canada, EU, and the USA. And some of the issues that we monitor very, very closely, and I could say almost on a daily, monthly basis, the accelerated erosion of tariffs applied on rums from third countries entering the EU market. The CARIFORUM rum industry is the beneficiary of a differential, say, tax regime, whereby rums coming from CARIFORUM member states enter the EU free of duty. However, rums coming from countries outside of the CARIFORUM region, they do pay a differential rate of import duties based on the price of the rum. This is not a situation which will exist in perpetuity. It was the outcome of a negotiated agreement between CARIFORUM member states and the European Commission in the late 90s as a result of what we call the 0 for 0 agreement on white spirits, which totally liberalized the trade in rum between the US and the European Union. And the industry was galvanized into action to bring this to the attention of the member states. And we were successful in achieving what is really an interim solution which would give us breathing space to attempt to reorganize our business to meet the threat down the line. But this differential tariff is not expected to exist in perpetuity. It is not linked to inflation, and it was designed to erode naturally. However, given the state of play with the moribund nature of the Doha round of negotiations, the Commission has embarked upon an aggressive, shall we say, initiative to have bilateral free trade agreements with certain other regions, including Latin America. And as part of those free trade agreements, they have been accelerating the erosion of the protective tariffs that we enjoy. So that is a serious issue for us. Secondly, we have an issue where governments may introduce or modify regulations which may have an influence on market access. One that comes to mind has been the labeling directives coming out of the European Commission, which would mandate that all spirits companies provide certain information on their labels. It would have been entirely unworkable, and that is it's just one issue that we have been monitoring. An issue that is of great concern is the WHO initiative to curtail the advertising and sale of alcoholic beverages. WIRSPA as an organization is not against the responsible advertising and marketing of alcoholic beverages. What it is against is that any efforts to regulate this must be done based on science, not on emotion. And we have, and the global spirits industry, or the global beverage alcohol industry, has an issue with the WHO with respect to how it seeks to go about regulating the sale and advertising of beverage alcohol products. A final activity that we have is we collect data regularly from our traditional markets on the imports of rum from all countries into those markets. We need to see what our competitors are doing. We need to know how they stand against our performance, and based on other information which we collect, we then determine whether or not they, in our opinion, are deriving an unfair advantage which is being seen in their increased exports into our traditional markets, and therefore we bring these things to the attention of our governments. In order to facilitate this early warning system, WIRSPA has got representation in London, deals with European matters and WTO matters. And our representative in London is the Caribbean Council. Executive Director is here, David Jessup, Mr. David Jessup. And Caribbean Council has been representing WIRSPA for a number of years. We have a representative in Ottawa, which deals with Canadian issues, and in Washington, D.C. for USA issues. We are represented by a firm of attorneys called Pickard, Kenson, Rowe. Pickard, Kenson, Rowe has been very, very instrumental, specifically in this issue of the rum subsidies coming out of the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, in advising WIRSPA and to some extent member states on the legality of these rum subsidies. So these representatives, they monitor and report regularly on developments which could have an adverse impact on the industry and its ability to compete effectively in the marketplace. One key aspect of our advocacy is that we form alliances. We have a strategic alliance with the rum industry in the French Doms. The reason for that is the French Doms, they get the ear of the government of France. And in concert with them, we collaborate on matters of mutual interest, where our interests lie. Not on everything, but matters of mutual interest, we have had signed some agreements. And we actively participate in the World Spirits Alliance, which is a grouping of beverage alcohol producers worldwide. They meet once a year in Geneva in July. So, in a nutshell, the Industry Association, WORSPA, recognized from the outset that trade advocacy was going to be an integral part of its function, of how it can help the member companies of its national associations, and given the fact that the industry is heavily dependent on export performance, anything which may affect its ability to export in any market, not just its traditional markets, would be of importance to the industry, and it would be prudent too, even though there is a huge cost involved. This does not come cheap. Even though there is a huge cost involved, the cost of not doing it would be far greater. I would just like to leave you with that little message. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.